I had a vendor get on a call. I had sent an email and said, I need to make you understand some things before you jump into all the ways you can benefit us. And a PowerPoint came up with a presentation about all the goals and all the bells and whistles. And I think I said 3 times, you're not listening to me. Hi, everyone. It's your host, Christine Miles. Welcome back to Shine a Light. It's a pleasure to have my guest here today, Ari Gerzon. As we were working on your pronunciation, Kessler is a speaker, trainer, coach who helps schools and districts build stronger, more equitable school-family partnerships. I can't wait to hear more about this. You lead the Family Partnerships Department for Boulder Valley School District in Colorado, an award-winning author on the same team, Bridging Educators and Underrepresented Families Together, which earned you the gold medal for Best Education Book of 2024. Congratulations. I'm sure that was not like 2 people were in the running for that. That was probably pretty significant. A longtime educator, former principal, once a principal, always a principal, bilingual teacher, and a national voice on innovative family engagement practices. You regularly present at conferences and contribute to publications like Educational Leadership, Principal Magazine, and Edutopia. Welcome, Ari. It's so nice to have you.
Thanks so much, Christine, for having me. Looking forward to a dynamic conversation with you.
Yeah, that's quite a resume. But I'm curious, like, how did you get into, because you obviously worked in schools, but this is near to my heart. And let me tell you why. I'll take you back. So I started my career, my first job out of college, I was a home-based family therapist. And I went into people's homes and saw very much what it was like for families who maybe didn't have a great educational experience, who were raising children, sometimes in some very difficult circumstances. And school was a fearful place for a lot of the families, especially if you don't have a good experience. And I think we lose sight of that we know that kids need educated. So I saw the difficulties and I saw how much of this gap needs to be bridged. And part of why I wanted to have you on is because you're bridging that gap and it's so important. But this is like kind of what you're doing now. And how did you get into this aspect of the work where you're bringing families and educators together to really help them team together?
Yeah, my education career started early as a teacher and principal. It was in some ways shaped by my 4 immigrant grandparents coming to this country, making a lot of sacrifices, and me seeing that their sacrifices led to my mom and my dad's educational opportunities that really changed the trajectory of our family's life. So a real passion for both education, particularly at the heart of immigrant students and families. My teaching years, you mentioned bilingual teacher. I was mostly working with immigrant students and was passionate about the achievement gap and showing that students of all backgrounds are possible of really thriving in school. And I had to do a lot of learning to become a better teacher to make that happen. And so fast forward, I get to the end of 9 years as a school leader. I'm a bit burnt out, but I've learned a lot, grown a lot, and am taking the first kind of brief sabbatical in my life after 17 years as an educator. And an opportunity comes up to lead the Family Partnerships Department. This is about 8 years ago here locally in the same district I graduated from high school decades and decades ago. Wow. And I looked back, Christine, on my principal years, and a few things that we did really took us from a place of distrust and kind of a broken community before I arrived to real progress. So there was some inspiration around, wow, this would be fascinating to learn more about partnerships because it brings in my passion for equity and social justice, a relationship-centered approach. SEL was my mom's life work. And so that part of how do we cultivate relationships and community with adults, where I'd always done it effectively with young people, but didn't know a lot necessarily on how to do it between parents and educators. So that plus regrets, I would say. You said once a principal, always a principal. When I look back on being a principal, there was a ton I didn't know about how to effectively partner with families. And that fueled this desire I'm really into learning. And so it fueled this curiosity of what are the best ways to bring together and build bridges when many of our families, as you said, do feel marginalized, isolated, and often, as I've discovered, lots of distrust and educators who aren't ready to meet that distrust in an actually supportive, soothing, rapport building way.
Well, My experience, you've said so much, so there's a lot of things I want to go back to because so many things you said is important. But again, I'm reflecting on and talk about not knowing anything. At 22 as a family therapist, I feel your pain as a young educator going, what could we have done in that if we were in that role and had some real knowledge at the time? Because a lot of those lessons are learned with the very parents that we're working with or the children. But that distrust is what I saw so much from the families. And again, that may have been as the student themselves, they didn't have a
Yeah.
great experience. And so they're taking that story into the schools with their kids. But then I also empathize with the educators because they're coming in feeling criticized and maybe they're doing the best they can. So now we're negotiating, right? Because we have two distrustful systems that are working supposed to be working together. And that's the gap you're trying to bridge, I would imagine.
Exactly. And I think to educators' credit, they've not been trained often. I know I wasn't on how to do family engagement well, that
Sure.
at most it might be a couple hours of training. So most of us are actually, if we're honest about it, lacking confidence. Actually, a MetLife survey a decade ago revealed, Christine, that the area that educators felt least confident in their entire role was engaging with families. So that should ideally lead us to be vulnerable and not have to be the experts
Yeah.
and become learners. But I think what happens is most new educators and then veteran educators just default to it's more comfortable to keep a relational distance from families
Sure.
and not be vulnerable. And that limits growth and partnerships from what I've seen many times.
Well, it's so fascinating because the same is true in business, of course, and in terms of we're supposed to have the answers, right? I mean, educators are going into schools and giving a lot of providing a lot of information all day, and then we're expecting them to be able to know how to navigate conflict and high stakes conversations and all these things without any training. Of course, this is both music to my ears and it also makes me a little crazy or let me say crazier because the expectation is that this is just something we should know how to do without any training. These are high level negotiations that we're talking about when you're talking about two systems or two sets of factions that are not seeing that the problem is the same for both of them. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like you're saying, it requires significant movement on both the educator and the
Yeah.
parent part to build these bridges. And I would also say part of where I get inspired, knowing the overwhelm that educators and parents feel more than ever, I think today, is what are easy, efficient ways to build bridges. And I think about parent teacher conferences as a conventional example that in some of the schools where we had teams, we were listening to parents share honestly how disappointing that experience was from their vantage point and that the tweaks that we led teachers in a pretty brief training around were not rocket science, that it was, hey, don't talk at them for 18 minutes, don't overwhelm with data. To simplify it, you've known the kid for 6 weeks, they've known him for 7, 12, 14 years. Treat them as experts, ask a few questions that really honors their expertise, and then share what you know about the kid, and then ideally ask more questions and definitely give them space to pose questions that's the default. Some of our parents say I only get to really connect at the middle or high school level in particular at conferences, that we can make that kind of relational experience so much more rewarding with some of these minor modifications to like the approach we're taking. And that's where I've seen a lot of leverage to actually create significantly deeper levels of trust between educators and families.
Yeah, it is so counterintuitive though, isn't it? When it's seek to understand before you try to tell or advise or my mantra is you have to earn that. When you understand seek to understand, listen to understand first, even if everything you found out you already knew, it doesn't matter. It's a Broadway show. The person that you're listening to, they want to feel like that's the first time for them. They don't want you to think you've done the show 8 times a week,
Yes.
twice a day, right? We
Yeah.
want to feel so but and normally things come out of that anyway, which it sounds like that's the work you're doing, but it is so counterintuitive to everything we've taught. I can tell you that I had an experience this morning that I won't name the vendor, but I was highly frustrated. So I'm taking this what you just said into conversations with educators, which is I had a vendor get on a call. I had sent an email and said I need to make you understand some things before you jump into all the ways you can benefit us. And short a PowerPoint came up with a presentation about all the goals and all the bells and whistles, and I think I said 3 times, "You're not listening to me." So, but I articulated it. My You tell me, but my experience is parents aren't gonna say, "You're not listening to me." They're just gonna not feel listened to, and then they're gonna feel hurt, frustrated, or disappointed when they leave the room.
You're right. That really, because of history you're describing that many parents have had as students themselves or as parents, and the positional power differences, they're not, that it really is incumbent upon us as educators to take the lead in creating the space and yeah, and shifting the approach. I grew up with a mom who was an educator, teaching, coaching educators and school leaders around social emotional learning. And so I've sat in more dyads practicing listening and authentic speaking. I mean, since I was 12 years old. So yeah, I do have like a particular deep belief, not to mention.
In 2 languages, no less.
Right, right.
Wait, so let's
Yeah.
go
So
back to that. You said that your all 4 grandparents were immigrants. Where did they immigrate from?
Ukraine, Poland via Mexico, and then the Netherlands for the two
Okay.
other.
Well, I'm 5'9" and very long limbs, so the Netherlands are my people, so
Nice.
the Germans. So they immigrated and your parents were first gen US, right? And
Yeah,
school systems.
exactly.
So what were the things that you learned about as a kid? Because this formed why you wanted to go into teaching, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think about my grandmother whose life history I wrote up as my senior thesis in college. She left her entire family at the age of 15 in the Ukraine, took a ship to Canada, taught herself English using a dictionary while she cleaned her cousin's house that she was staying in, and eventually made it to Michigan. But she loved school, but as a Jew was so targeted by her teachers that it was one of the signs she needed to flee. And ultimately,
Uh,
her 4 sisters and other family were killed
oh,
in the time of the Holocaust. So she made this brave escape and then made a lot of sacrifices. And there were stories, Christine, I heard as a kid and as a young teacher, such as how a lot of Jewish parents would take the letters, wooden letters, to teach their kids how to read and know the alphabet, cover them in honey, and kids would connect sweetness with learning as they got to
oh,
enjoy the
wow.
honey. So things like that were an inspiration as I thought about we can, to quote that poet Yeats, one of my favorite quotes was like, education is not the filling of a pail, it's the lighting of a fire. So that idea of like,
Oh,
how can
wow.
we take a different approach to education for students?
What a beautiful saying. Like, let's not gloss over that. That's powerful.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. Well, and lighting that fire, I guess I never thought about it this way, but between parents and educators, it's a pretty like unlit torch usually. There's not
Yeah.
much warmth. There's a lot of good intentions,
Sure.
but I'm learning that yeah, systems and best practices make a huge difference in starting to deepen rapport and communications and trust.
Well, and so much of it is about what you just described in terms of how simple yet hard, not easy. Simple,
Mhm.
you're making it simple but not easy, is that when you approach it, which will feel counterintuitive, from the vantage point of let me go in and listen first, understand, because they've known their kid for this many years and you've known them for
Yeah,
this many months, is just it's out of good intentions that we go into it the other way. But what that does creates the opposite of the reaction we wanna have, which is it doesn't feel as helpful. It just
yeah,
doesn't feel as
absolutely.
helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
springboard for these teams and a lot of my work in learning and support to our 56 schools was grounded in an understanding my first year that for decades our school system had guessed what families needed instead of simply asking them, listening, and then showing some follow through around what we learned from them. And
Sure.
it sounds almost too simple, but that was for decades we had achievement and opportunity gaps and all these other issues, especially with our immigrant families whose students were performing lower, and part of it was that we didn't have a connection with the families at all. And so that's catalyzed these pretty unique teams that have become the heart of my job and really something
Yeah.
that I'm passionate about.
It's so it It's always obvious when you're looking back at it, right? The simplicity of what we do. I think about like, okay, so you're helping immigrant families, but really it's no different when you're in a parent teacher conference with every student and parent,
No,
right? It's like
absolutely. Yeah.
it's the same thing, even though there may be less predisposition, at least on the surface, to go in as adversarial based on experiences, or but it's the same issue that you'll get a lot further to reduce conflict and to get cooperation if you really understand the perspective of the other person. And I would say, do you help parents do that as well with the educators, or is it always up to the educator to lead that? I always think everything's a
Uh,
relationship, so if we can make it both
yeah.
ways, you
Yeah,
know.
no, I mean, a good example is one of the best practices that has really been transformational the last few years is many parents say, especially at the middle and high school level, I don't even know the names of all my child's teachers and how to get in touch with them. And so we've implemented an
Uh,
app that allows families to text teachers the same way and across language differences, the same way that they text family members and friends,
oh,
so that we're moving beyond teacher emails and that the school dumps a ton of one-way communication. And instead of that, we're actually fostering real two-way communication, which of course is how relationships get built.
sure,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. So it's interesting. How are the teachers feeling about having that proximity and that kind of access with the families? Since that's something
Overall,
they've
they're,
been.
I mean, yeah, I mean, so overall, they're loving it. I mean, I think about two examples I heard that were reinforcing a couple months ago where an elementary teacher said, I've got a field trip tomorrow. I had one or two volunteers back out. It's 9:30 at night. Too late to call. Nobody's going to see my email. I sent a text through the app, and within 15 minutes, had my volunteers. And a high school teacher, Danielle, who said to me, "Yeah, we just trained folks on the app. Took 15 minutes." And a colleague said, "I've been trying for 2 weeks to find a mom to schedule a parent teacher conference without success. And by texting the mom within 5 minutes, they were synced up on a date." So those are just a couple examples where
It's amazing.
once they discover the ease and the power, they're like, this is a lot better than the way we've been doing things.
And not fearing that, because I don't know whose idea email was, but let's just get rid of it 'cause I don't know.
That's what parents are saying.
It's
Yes.
so it sucks up so much time and so much energy, and I'm sure there's boundaries and ways that you have to set things into place for teachers, but through an app versus a one-to-one, that makes a lot of sense. It's just that communication highway where you're partnering together. What a game changer. I think it's fascinating how closely linked your work is to what your grandparents went through. I mean, that's some tough
Mhm.
stuff. She lost her family getting away from that. So what made you so around education, but did you always know you wanted to be a teacher? Was that just a thing? You were like, yeah, I'm born to be a teacher.
Not necessarily. And it was interesting because my brother, when I was getting into it, was teaching. And as an older brother, he was always, don't copy me. So there was an element where I steered clear for a little while, was inspired visiting him doing Teach for America down in the South. But I took a different path. I was an oral historian at the age of 22 and a diversity
Wait.
consultant.
What's an oral historian? Let's talk about that for a second. What is that?
Yeah. So it's interviewing people. This is back in the day, right? This is like the late 90s. Interviewing people about their life history and turning it into a book that's a gift for
Oh,
their 80th birthday party. Or that was the
interesting.
majority of the projects. And the last one was with a high school that I serve to this day that's 10 miles away from me. And they were having their 10th anniversary as a school, innovative alternative high school. And in interviewing all their teachers at the age of 23, and on the verge of losing my consulting my diversity job, it was clear my passion and purpose is to teach. And so those interviews, listening to
Ah,
their journeys and the
interesting.
meaning they found was the inspiration to look for my first teaching job.
That first of all, I'm fascinated that you were an oral historian. So listening had to be part of what you did very, very well, because
Almost, yeah,
you got to go back
almost
to the
entirely.
beginning. You've got to get it all. You've got to be able to. I always say when you're listening, you listen to become a storyteller. We're all listening to tell somebody else the other
Hmm.
story, whether you just happen to write it down. I think that's what we should be doing in conversations. Hear what you have to say. I listen to it, and then I should be able to tell you the story you just told me. It's one of the missing pieces in communication. But when you have to actually codify that and put that in writing, you better be good at it. You
Yeah,
better at it.
yeah.
Yeah. That's
Well, and
fascinating.
you're creating, Christine, a personal link too of some joy. My daughter's 3, and I'm remembering when she was 1 on the changing table and other spots, she would gaze at me with captivation and it literally ask for stories when she was not even 2 yet. And nothing is more calming and soothing to her than listening to stories that she's
Right.
daily requesting several times. Tell me a story, Dad. So
And you
it's
probably
nice to
have
see
some.
the yes, and I'm like you said, constantly listening to families and educators so that I can pass
Yeah.
on. Because what someone told me last week after a training I did was this was for all of our principals locally. They said, your stories are still sticking with me. That was the part that
Yeah.
had the most power. So I'm trying to collect stories that then motivate people to change their approach to this work because it really, yeah, it's powerful when everyone's coming, like you were just saying, from a how can I listen to learn
Yeah.
lens and grow through
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Well, you just as a side note, because I think what you're saying about storytelling is so important. And again, I look at teachers because I think we're all in sales, right? If you're a teacher, you're in sales because you got to sell the family on what you're doing, what you think about the kid, whatever. And storytelling is one of the best ways to sell. And I think
Mm-hmm.
if you don't need 100 stories, you just need some really good ones to make the right points, right, Ari?
Yeah,
You're not
absolutely.
you're not rewriting every story when you're out in front of people. You're using stories that are very compelling to help move them to another way. And I think that's a myth about what we need to do when we tell a story. We don't need as many as we think. We just need some really strong ones.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would add in terms of like the approach to parents, creating a space to hear their stories and before that even just their perspectives and their needs, which sadly, Christine, in so many school meetings that invite parents are obligated to listen 97% of the time, and there are experts on how to better partner with families. So part of my work with these family and educator together teams that are now at 31 schools locally and in some different
Yeah.
states around the country is centering family voices, saying we're going to ask good questions and listen to families and also have space for them to listen and learn from us, but it's going to have real mutuality to it and more focus on them getting to share and us develop listening muscles that as educators we don't often have to because we're talking to kids and talking to parents.
97% of the meeting time with parents is us talking to them versus educators talking to them versus listening. Yeah.
Yeah, traditionally. I mean, my older brother just moved from Canada and he said that was his experience going to a meeting with a principal and teacher at the school. And he said to me, to hit me, it informs my work a year later after he said this to me. He said, I wanted to share my strengths and what I'm interested in. They didn't ask. They didn't ask any of us as parents. And I wanted to get to know the other parents, and there was no space for that. So I'm not trying to be too critical of its 97%. Maybe there's some schools where it's more like 70%, but the reality, I did it myself, and that regret of a parent
Sure.
teacher meeting being mostly them listening to me just has really
Well, this isn't I don't hear this and I appreciate the clarification. I don't hear this about blame. I hear this is about what we're taught to do. With all due respect, I mean, part of the school systems, we haven't taught listening in schools. Like, is there
mm,
formal listening training in your school district?
no. Yeah.
No. And so I've had teachers, educators talk on my podcast where I've been a guest and they're like, I never thought about it, but no one ever taught me that either. Like it's baked into every core curriculum. And yet we're not we're not teaching it overtly and certainly not in a way that creates a common skill set or common language. So why wouldn't we just show up to a meeting and again, I can fast forward to a sales team. 90% of their training is around being able to talk about the product and say the right thing to the customer. It's not about how do you understand the real need of the customer. That's the part that's taken for granted. So this is just mirroring all aspects of our life, right?
Yes. You're reminding me of some recent really negative and really positive customer service experiences I was on the client end of, and that listening was often the difference maker, as well as, of course, follow through of I'm not going to just keep spinning words around and
Sure.
keeping you frustrated. I'm going to truly hear what you need and try to give you some genuine support that yeah,
Just
it's
everything.
what builds trust. Yeah.
Well, who's gonna like what relationship starts well when it's just like, let me just talk about me and only me and never say anything. Like, I'm gonna come into a new relationship and I'm gonna talk 97% of the time about me and hope we have a really great relationship. We'd
Yep.
all go,
Yeah.
that's ridiculous, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, but again, it's also just the way the paradigm has been set up for so long, and I think we come in with we're supposed to have answers rather than we're supposed to seek to understand. I always say that the best way to become interesting is to become interested.
Yes. Oh, I like that a lot. You're reminding me that, like, when I think about some of the best practices in family engagement, I mean, one of them is relationship centered home visits.
What
And
does that
that
mean? Just take the
to,
listeners through that.
it means, yeah, it means an educator going with another educator to visit a family, most likely in their home, to get a sense of the child's life and their
Sure.
world, the family's world. A family occasionally isn't comfortable with that, a park, a coffee shop, but
Yeah.
going to the home, spending 30, 40 minutes asking about their hopes and dreams for their child, and really just taking off the educator hat and human to human,
Yeah.
listening most of that 30, 40 minutes. So listening is truly at the heart of some best practices. And then one of the other ones is more on the other side where it's us as educators doing the talking. And I'm thinking about positive phone calls, which was my favorite practice as a school leader. That, of course, is us doing more of the talking, but it's surprising, delighting a parent with good news about their kid. And as they take that in, they're like in delighted listening mode. They then are so much more likely to
Yeah.
feel trust if there's a hard conversation, or just to feel like, oh my gosh, you're in the middle of your busy world as an educator, you're taking these 3 minutes. So you're just getting me thinking about, like, what's the balancing point between how we need to effectively talk with families as well as really
Well, you're
put that
talking about
aside and
catching
listen.
somebody doing something right, and isn't that what if I mean, again, I for my listeners, that's a school message, that's also a leader message, and I think
Yes.
we're the let me go down a rabbit hole and see what you think about this, but catching somebody doing something right means looking at something specific and nuanced, not just great job. It's really about your kid today made a difference for another kid on the recess out at recess when he went over and put his arm around him when he was
Mhm.
having a tough moment,
Yeah.
not he's a nice kid, right? It's really specific behavioral stuff, right? That's how you really make an impact is if you notice what's really going on. And when you catch somebody doing something right, it's an amazing thing because you help the person feel seen. That's another form of listening if you ask me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I really appreciate that connection you're making. And you're right. It's a powerful leadership move. And I'm writing an article now about the parallels between parenting and being an educator, and trying to apply as an older dad what I learned 20 some years ago as a teacher with my daughter, and being specific in my praise is one I haven't written about yet. And you're fueling, that's one more point to make, that I was always taught as a teacher, if you give feedback, you're going to propel learning if it's specific, precise praise, as they called it for school
Yeah.
leaders, precise praise, not the, like, well done, nice job, which I still default to out of
Well, of
habit.
course,
So that, yeah, I appreciate that.
that's an encouragement, and in the business world, it's praise and criticism are judgment based versus feedback, which is behavioral based.
Yeah.
So that's the difference. So when you and look, I can always say you can be employer teacher of the month, right? Get the parking space, you got a award, and then the next day your principal or boss calls you and says, "Come to my office." What's the first thing you're thinking? I did something wrong. I'm in trouble.
Yes, exactly.
So if we surprise and delight, I love that. You call a parent and say, "Let me." You could take the most behaviorally challenged kid, and you call them and say, "He had a great or she had a great moment today."
Mhm.
That's game changing again. But I see that as a form of listening because I think we have to listen with our eyes, not just with our ears. We need to
Absolutely.
watch and observe so that people feel seen.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great point. And it's reminding me, this was something I shared with school leaders last week, is the next step, and it's taken me too many years to realize it, but is to systematize it. Because it's nice when there's three
Sure.
teachers doing this by choice, but what I've seen be so powerful is when we get a principal on board to give his staff or her staff 10 minutes,
Yep.
I'll do it. If that's a middle school with 60 staff members, they're making 3 calls in 10 minutes. that's 180 families. It's like a quarter of the school maybe, where suddenly you've just made their day. The kids elated, parents feeling more connected to the school and the teacher. Everyone really wins, and it's 10 minutes of time in a single month. That's pretty
Well,
easy to
and
carve out, I
how
think.
so here's the other thing I would imagine that does, and I might sneeze, so forgive me,
Okay. Okay.
because it's
Please do.
I feel that coming on, Ari, just so
It
you
happened to
know.
me earlier today.
It's like I have no say over the matter, my body will tell me. But if I'm an educator that doesn't know how to have those conversations that are difficult and heated, or
Mhm.
to bridge those gap, if you ask me to call and say something negative to a parent, I'm like, I'm not as excited about that. But if you could tell me, call and tell them some good news, like you won a prize, it's such an easier, it's so much of an easier phone call. There doesn't have to be a lot of training or fear around that, because so you're bridging the gap for them as well as serving that parent differently. You're
Right.
giving
Helping
them
them.
a
Oh,
get over the hump.
yeah. 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 And it's needed, Christine, because what I hear consistently from middle and high school colleagues is many of them don't do phone calls really. So there's a reluctance built in there, and every educator is squeezed for time. So
Yeah.
one of my biggest learnings has been leaders have to create the time for best practices and not add it as one more thing to hope
Yeah,
people do.
that makes sense. I'm making a guess here too with newer teachers. They're not used to making phone calls.
Mhm.
Like, that's an old
Yeah,
school approach, right?
exactly. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I don't answer the phone necessarily, and I'm definitely of not a newer teacher, let's just say that. But, so, yeah, to create those, but those connections do mean more when you have those, even if you're leaving a message, right? I'm calling to
Yeah,
tell you
exactly.
a moment about your child today, and I just wanted to thank you for what he did or she did. Yeah. Again, let's what if we just brought that into our life and just took that home? Like, honey, you know what? I just noticed that today you did A, B, and C, and I want to
Yes,
tell you how much I appreciate that. Wouldn't our houses feel a lot better? Relationship.
absolutely. Be more,
So
yeah,
you're
more
spreading
connected.
the word to much more than educators here are. These are very practical things that are so simple, but obviously we don't do as we get into our modes and we forget how to show that appreciation. So, is your
Yeah.
program unique to your school district, or is this, I know you said it's national, but tell me the name of your program again. I don't
Yeah,
want to
so it's families and educators together teams. And it
Okay.
has been unique to our school system. And now the book I wrote about 2.5 years ago has led to a few schools in different communities in other states launching FETs, the acronym, the FET teams, Family Educator Together. And my hope with the book is that it continues to inspire that, because I felt once I saw the power of it and would come home late at night inspired by these family
Yeah.
educator gatherings over dinner, that every school community in the country needs a space like this. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
exactly mirror the
Sure.
principles behind this approach, but there's so many benefits.
And that's the systemic fix that you're working towards. That this isn't just three teachers in your district and making it all better. It's really about create. This is a systemic problem in our approach, that's probably rooted. It started one way for one reason, and now it's continued. That's the root of dysfunction. Starts
Yeah,
functionally, becomes dysfunctional. So let's reorient and make this a real systemic fix to a larger problem.
exactly. Yeah, one school at a time. And yeah, and every school that has created a team, they've seen so many different positive outcomes that it
Yeah.
immediately becomes just part of the school culture. But in this age of overwhelm, I have to do a good job of sharing with anybody what are the whys behind creating a team. But it sure lightens the load so that one or two people aren't trying to do everything around family engagement,
Yeah.
and cultivates new champions to distribute the work and actually do the work, because it usually gets put on the back burner for most schools in terms of family engagement being a, we'll just do those 4 events and we're good.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you probably have the same parents showing up, don't you?
If we take the same approaches as always, it's, yeah, same parents coming.
Yeah, because that again, that's what you're a single mom or a single dad, and you're trying to get to a school event. It's not the same if you have 3 kids at home and you have one in this and you don't have that, or you don't have family and extended support, or you can't afford a babysitter. There's a lot of things that impact, and again, I saw this from a very young age,
Yeah.
how hard it is to partner with the school, because and also just that authoritative approach, which is a telling approach, again, not for bad intentions, but that also will not what make people show up. Yeah. So,
I'm curious, Christine, when you look back on that work you did in your early 20s, what was often the difference maker that a school could do to start to shift that distrust into trust?
well, I worked home-based, school-based, and then hospital-based as a family therapist, but the kid was the diagnosed problem, but we
Mhm.
believe the family system and the system around them needed to reorient to make them healthier because they were responding in context, right? So what I saw was the more, like you said, the more open dialogues that we could have, and the more we could help be the bridge around the system
Yeah,
around the child was communicating differently, that's when things got better. I remember I was probably in my early 30s, and I was counseling a family, a mom and a single mom and her daughter, and she was at a Catholic school and a private school, and she had ADD and diagnosed ADD. And I went out, and I was working in a context where this isn't what you did. I just said, "I'll go to the school with you." I've done this a few of these kind of meetings in my day. And I sat down with the administrator and I said, "This girl needs some help this way and that way," and tried to have the discussion. She said, "Yeah, we don't do that here." And I was like, "Okay, well, that is at least clear that if you're not gonna, that's not, they have to fit, she has to fit to us, not the other way around." And I said to the mom,
yeah.
"This school is probably not where she's gonna thrive." And that's a tough message. And she felt very dejected. And
Mhm.
I thought, well, you're better off knowing that than thinking that this is what's gonna work for you in the long run, because your daughter's probably not gonna, like I said, do well. So when that communication isn't there, only more trouble is in the future, is what I saw.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it reminds me what you're saying, that often schools are unconsciously sending the message, you adapt to our ways of involving you as a parent or you don't, and we
Yeah,
might judge you accordingly, versus, hey, help us become true partners in reimagining what it should look like, and that we
yeah,
all hold a piece of the answer. And that's,
yeah,
most schools don't create the space to have those conversations. And these team gatherings are an hour and a half once a month over delicious dinner and highly connective on the human level. So there's no regrets about, oh, that time was too much to give, because there's just,
yeah.
yeah,
Because you
so
get
many
something
value.
back from it, yeah. And look,
Hmm.
I'm going back several decades in terms of where schools are and how they progressed in terms of how they meet kids where they are. And I'm not saying all schools are there, but this was a much harsher environment that I think we've made some evolutions from, in my experience. And I still think it's a good example of what happens in terms of why people don't come to schools. I was the one, I kind of felt like, wow, I just walked them into the situation in my hubris, saying, "Well, I've done this plenty of times and had success." And but we got a clear answer. But like I said, I was the advocate there. Otherwise, the mom wasn't. She didn't really have the awareness that to have that conversation. So I kind of took the hit and was the bad guy or the good guy, or a little bit of both. But that's a hard thing for parents to advocate for themselves. It's almost like being a patient. When you're a patient, you need somebody else sometimes to be your eyes and ears. And so that's why I love the work you're doing, because you're creating a system that makes it easier for these conversations to happen, because they're hard conversations to happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
hard.
And I'm constantly learning from parents and educators' perspectives. And I think what right now sets me aside from a lot of the other folks in the field is, I'm going to 30 schools a month, talking about the work, hearing the barriers, hearing the obstacles
Yeah.
in the thick of the muck, and trying to figure out solutions. So I don't feel like I'm at some distance telling
No.
people, well, this book says this, so you should do it, or, and
You're still
that's
an
what makes it.
oratory, what did you call it? An oratory historian? What did you
Oh,
say?
an oral historian. Yeah,
You're still
going
an oral historian, Ari. You are still
right.
an oral historian, right?
It's true. And in the gatherings, I do a good job of listening. In coaching and preparing the meetings, I honestly am working on, how can I tap the wisdom of the people I'm coaching more and be less giving them tips. It's always a balancing act. But yeah, I've been coming back to, and as we've been talking, there's a Margaret Wheatley quote I always share in the home visits training. And she says something like, listening heals our divisions and makes us brave again. And it feels like with all of taking a bigger look at our country and our world, there's so much division and emphasis on differences of opinion, and creating these spaces where people truly get to know each other on a human level and listen more deeply. It's inspiring to watch people engage in it because it does change
And it
relationships and communities.
and it doesn't matter if we disagree on all the issues, because fundamentally, when you start to understand the other perspective, that helps us come to the best ideas anyway. My thing is, I learned this young. I think listening either deepens invisible wounds or it helps heal them.
Hmm.
I just think that if we can make problems worse without even recognizing it by not listening. I'm still agitated from my call this morning. I got to tell you. I know it's an affront to me when somebody that blatantly isn't listening, because I'm in the field and I think if I'm your client, I you should know that, but it's like that, but I have an awareness to it. Most people aren't deeply aware of what is actually impacting them. So then they'll think it's more personal. I didn't like that person, or I didn't but when it's fundamentally they just didn't listen well. And less than 2% of people are taught how to do this. So why would they do it well?
Exactly. Yeah, I liked what you said earlier about like we're not trained on this. Yeah, and you're reminding me, Christine, of a family friend. He came up, and he might be a great guest down the road. He came up with something called the safe harbor method, and basically it's for couples, for kids. I've been trying to get into our schools where it's literally a 2-minute timer, and you with your partner or whoever it is, you alternate 2 minutes until you feel complete. And having done that with romantic partners, other people in my life, just having that structure of these 2 minutes, I'm purely listening, has transformed the quality and the outcomes of those conversations. So those are the kinds of simple structures that most fields of life nowadays are desperately in need of, but don't integrate or don't have an awareness of. So I do feel passionate about what he's doing and what others like you are doing to really center listening as a key
Yeah.
part of relationships.
Well, and just that's just to me putting time on task. If you like, there's the CIA says, since you quote, I'm going to compete with you now on quotes, Ari, because your
I don't
quotes
usually
are much.
remember quotes well, but I love them.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going with you, because here you've sucked me in. But the CIA has a quote that silence sucks the truth out. So if you give
Mm,
someone 2 minutes of silence, you're going to get more than if you do nothing. So my belief is we should have the tools and the actual common language rather than just be winging it. But even if you just do that, you are so much further down the road than if you didn't do anything. So we're this is a simpler solution. It's just all the defenses go up and all the other things. So you have to have two people that are willing to play by those rules. And but it is, I think, such a good practice just to say to yourself, I'm not going to do anything but stay in the moment for the other person. It's just a huge
yeah,
gift. It's a huge
yeah,
gift. So
absolutely.
tell everyone, first of all, here's the other thing I learned about you is that once people have you around, they keep you around, because you went to the high school and you worked there. So you stick. I can see that. It's a very nice quality that you obviously bring a lot of yourself to the work. And I think that people are probably very attracted to that about you. So it's nice to know
Appreciate
you.
that.
Yeah. So where can people find you, and if they want to learn more about what you do for schools?
Yeah, easy to connect with on LinkedIn. My book on the same teams on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, easy to find. And my new website, sameteamconsulting.org, has a ton of free resources, articles, podcasts, as well as some of the trainings and coaching I offer. So pretty easy to find.
Thank
And
you.
do encourage anyone to reach out who wants thought partnership support. Besides my daughter as my priority number one, like my inspiration right now is very high around seeing
Yeah.
small efforts lead to big outcomes.
Yeah. Same team, not plural. Same team, right?
Exactly. Same
Sameteam.com.
team.
Wonderful.
Sameteamconsulting.org. Yeah.
And your daughter's two now?
A three.
Three.
Yeah.
That's a fun age, right? Is
It
she?
is.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool that you
Yeah. I
tell
mean,
her story.
I'll share one. I don't cry often, but we were reading together last night and we were playing, and I looked at her and I could already sense, because every parent says they get big so quick. And in my heart, I was thinking, boy, I'm going to really miss when she's 3. And I know it's not going to be that far from now when I'm already wishing and then I'll never get to go back in time and have her be
Yeah.
3 again. So really a grief and a gratitude all in the same moment.
Well, that is what it means to be present, doesn't it? Because to take in both aspects of the moment.
Yeah.
My father was he died in 2021. He was 89, so and we had a beautiful goodbye, but the last couple days of his life, he was very aware he was transitioning, but same thing, I walked in the room and he would light up and I his face, he would get absolutely elated, and then it would very quickly turn to the most sad face that I ever
Mm.
saw him have, and I could tell he knew he was saying goodbye, that he was so happy to see me, but he knew it was one of the last times he would see me
Yeah.
simultaneously, and
Wow.
so that's why I say self-awareness is a bitch sometimes, Ari.
Yes. Yes.
It's a blessing and a curse.
It is.
Because when you're that aware, you're aware of both emotions, but I think there's more to getting that than to not having it, so I appreciate you sharing that personal moment. I can see her sitting with you and what that must feel
Yeah.
like as a parent,
Yeah.
so
Well,
it's
thanks
a
for sharing
wonderful.
your father's story. It's really moving
Yeah,
too.
it was really it was very fascinating to take that in and to experience it, to experience life with that kind of presence, I think is an amazing, it's an amazing thing. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you for being here. Find
Thanks
Ari
so
at
much, Christine, for having me.
Same
It's a
Team,
delight.
LinkedIn. Yep. And keep doing the work you're doing with conversations and for families. It's wonderful. And thanks
Thanks.
everyone for listening to Shine a Light. And I will see you next time. Thank you.